She thought the worst thing that could happen at a wedding was bad weather. She was wrong. The worst thing is walking into the bridal suite and finding your husband, the most feared man in 3 states, standing over your new sister-in-law with her dress half undone and guilt written so deep into his face it might as well have been carved there with a knife. Isabella Moretti had survived a lot of things married to Leonardo, but she would not survive this quietly, and neither would he. Drop a like and comment your city below. Let me see how far this story travels. The Napa Valley stretched out in every direction like something out of a painting that cost more than most people's houses. Rolling hills gone golden in the late afternoon sun. Rows of vines so perfectly spaced they looked engineered by someone who had never once allowed anything in their life to grow crooked. The Moretti estate sat at the top of the highest hill, 300 acres of property purchased decades ago by a man who understood that power needed a stage. And a vineyard in wine country was as good a stage as any. Giovanni Moretti had bought this land with money that didn't entirely come from wine, but that was a conversation nobody had at the dinner table. The wedding had started at 4 in the afternoon, outdoor ceremony on the main lawn with white chairs arranged in precise rows and a string quartet playing something classical that none of the guests under 40 recognized. There were 200 people in attendance. Maybe 30 of them were there because they genuinely loved Adrian Moretti. The rest were there because Leonardo had invited them, and when Leonardo Moretti invited you somewhere, you came. You dressed well, you smiled, you complimented the venue, and you did not ask questions about the source of the wine you were drinking or the names on the property deed. Isabella had stood in the 3rd row during the ceremony beside her husband, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same Italian brand he'd worn for 15 years, the one she'd bought him every birthday without thinking much about it anymore. She watched Adrian at the altar. He was nervous in the way young men get nervous when they realize the thing they've been wanting has finally arrived and they're not entirely sure they deserve it. His hands kept moving, adjusting his jacket, smoothing his tie, touching the boutonniere that one of the groomsmen had already straightened twice. She liked Adrian. She'd always liked him. He was softer than Leonardo, less armored, the kind of man who laughed too loud at his own jokes and meant it. He didn't have his brother's hardness, that particular quality Leonardo had developed somewhere in his 20s, where he could sit across a table from someone and let the silence do the work for him. Adrian felt things on his face before he could stop them. You always knew where you stood with Adrian. Vivian Cross had walked down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than Isabella's first car. Ivory silk with a low back and a train that 2 bridesmaids worked to keep out of the grass. She was beautiful in the way that makes people a little uncomfortable, the kind of beauty that demands something from the people looking at it. Dark hair, dark eyes, a stillness about her face that could read as either serenity or calculation depending on your frame of mind. Isabella had met her 6 months ago when Adrian brought her to a family dinner in San Francisco. She'd been quiet that night, polite, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments, complimented the house without going overboard. Isabella had thought, she's smart, and she'd meant it as a compliment. She was replaying that dinner now, standing beside the pond at the far edge of the reception lawn, a glass of champagne in her hand that she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. The reception was in full force behind her, a tent the size of a small aircraft hangar lit with soft gold lights, a band playing something smooth and forgettable, the sound of 200 well-dressed people making the specific kind of conversation that happens when everyone in a room has more money than they'll ever need, and most of them are keeping secrets. Catering staff moved through the crowd with trays. A man near the bar was laughing too hard at something. Somewhere near the dance floor, Adrian was doing what grooms do, trying to be present in the moment while half his brain was already somewhere else. Isabella had stepped away from the noise 20 minutes ago. She told herself it was the heels. Her feet hurt, the heels were new, she needed 5 minutes on flat ground. But the truth, the one she didn't entirely look at, was that she'd been watching Leonardo all afternoon and something in her chest had gone very quiet in a way she didn't have a word for. He'd been fine during the ceremony. Attentive, he'd held her hand for part of it. He'd leaned down at one point and said something in her ear about the vineyard, something easy and warm, and she'd smiled because that's what you do. But twice, she'd looked over and found him not watching Adrian at the altar, but watching Vivian. Not the way men sometimes watch beautiful women at social events, with that sideways, involuntary glance they think nobody notices. He'd been watching her steadily, with focus, the same way he looked at balance sheets and property contracts and everything else he needed to understand completely. She'd filed it somewhere she didn't plan to open. But here she was, standing by the pond, champagne going flat in her hand, the laughter from the tent too loud and too bright, thinking about the way her husband had looked at her new sister-in-law. She finished the champagne, set the glass on the low stone wall beside the pond, rolled her shoulders back. She was being ridiculous, she knew that. Leonardo was many things, complicated, controlled, occasionally frightening in ways she'd learned not to examine too closely. But he had never given her real reason to doubt him in 15 years of marriage. Not once. She had built a life inside the structure of his certainty, the same way the vines on this hill had been trained to grow along wires and frames, and she was not going to unravel herself over a look at a wedding. She smoothed her dress, picked up the empty glass to return it, started walking back toward the tent. She almost didn't notice the door to the estate house standing open. The main house sat uphill from the reception tent, connected by a stone path lined with small lanterns. It was mostly closed off for the event. The family had arranged for the bridal party to use certain rooms on the upper floor for preparation, and guests were not meant to wander inside. The door to the side entrance, the one that opened near the service stairwell, was usually kept shut. It wasn't shut now. Isabella stopped walking. She told herself it was nothing, a catering staff member, someone looking for a bathroom, the estate manager checking on something. She stood there for maybe 15 seconds. The sound of the band floated up the hill. Someone near the tent laughed that too loud laugh again. The door stood open, a rectangle of warm light against the stone facade of the house. She went inside. The stairwell was quiet. Her heels were loud on the stone steps, and she slowed down without deciding to, moving more carefully, one hand on the railing. The upper hallway was carpeted, which muffled everything, turned the world into something muted and close. She passed 2 closed doors, reached the third door, which was the bridal suite, the room where Vivian had gotten ready that morning, where the photographer had taken pictures of the bridesmaids helping with the veil. This door was not fully closed either. There was a half-inch gap, enough for sound to get through, enough for a thin line of warm light to fall across the carpet. She heard Leonardo's voice, low, deliberate, the voice he used in a certain kind of conversation, the one where he was trying to be measured but the edges had gone tight. I told you to wait. We discussed this. Tonight was not the moment to... She didn't hear Vivian's response clearly. A word or two. Something sharp. Then Leonardo again. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't been counting every hour since... Isabella pushed the door open. The room spread out in front of her in the 2 or 3 seconds before her brain caught up with what her eyes were transmitting. The low light from the bedside lamps, the wedding gown that should have been hanging carefully on the wardrobe door instead, bunched and pulled at the back where the zipper had been partly worked down. Vivian standing near the window with her arms crossed and her hair no longer perfect, and Leonardo with his jacket off and his back to the door, turning toward the sound of it opening with an expression that went through 3 different things in the space of a single second. The first thing was control. The automatic armor of a man who never allowed himself to be caught at anything. The second thing was recognition, that the armor had failed. The third thing was something she had never seen on his face in 15 years, something close to fear. Nobody spoke. The 3 of them stood in the warm light of the bridal suite, while the sound of the reception drifted up through the window. Music, voices, the gentle percussion of a party that didn't know yet that something had broken. Isabella looked at the dress, at the zipper, at the way Vivian was standing with her back pressed slightly against the window frame, arms still folded, chin raised in a posture that could have been defiance, or could have been shame, or could have been both at once. She looked at her husband. Isabella? His voice had recovered. It was careful now, the way it got when he was managing a situation. This isn't... Don't. The word came out of her flat and quiet, the way water sounds when it stops moving. Don't tell me what it isn't. There's a conversation we need to not hear. She didn't move. She wasn't sure she could. Not in front of her. Vivian said something then, her name maybe, or something intended to be explanatory, And Isabella looked at her directly for the first time since she'd walked through the door, and something in that look was enough that Vivian stopped talking. The silence went on for several seconds. Then the door behind Isabella opened. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She heard the footsteps on the carpet, heard them stop, heard the sharp intake of breath that was not quite a sound, just the ghost of one. The sound a person makes when their body receives information their mind isn't ready for. Adrian said, "What?" and then stopped. The sentence did not have an ending. There wasn't one that fit. Isabella turned around. He was standing in the doorway in his wedding suit, tie still perfect, boutonniere still in place, with the expression of a man who had walked into something that was still in the process of becoming what it was. His eyes went from Isabella to Vivian to Leonardo, and then back to Vivian, and the story assembled itself in front of him the way bad news always does. Not all at once, but in pieces, each piece worse than the one before it. "Vivian." His voice was careful and strange, the way you talk when you're trying to give someone one last chance to give you a different answer than the one you already know is coming. "What is this?" Vivian opened her mouth, closed it. The dress was still half undone at the back. Adrian looked at his brother. Leonardo had put his jacket back on at some point in the last 10 seconds, which was the specific kind of automatic self-preservation instinct that, under other circumstances, might have been almost impressive. He was standing straight, shoulders back, the posture of a man preparing to control a room, but his face wasn't cooperating. The control was there in the bones of it, in the set of his jaw and the steadiness of his eyes. But underneath that, around the edges, in the places where a man's face tells the truth before his mouth decides to, there was something exposed that Leonardo Moretti had never allowed to be exposed in front of anyone. "I'll explain everything," Leonardo said. "Explain." Adrian said the word the way you say something when you're not sure it's real. "Not here, downstairs, in the study away from the—" "No." Adrian's voice had changed. The nervousness from the altar was gone, replaced by something that hadn't been there before, something harder, and not yet identified, like a shape seen through fog. "Here, right now. You explain it right now." What happened in the next few minutes in that room was the kind of conversation that doesn't follow rules. It didn't build logically or move from point to point. It erupted. Adrian's voice climbed and broke and climbed again. Vivian cried and then stopped crying and went very still, and the stillness was worse than the crying. Leonardo spoke in low, controlled sentences that became less controlled as Adrian kept talking, kept asking, kept refusing to accept the versions that were offered to him. Isabella stood near the door and did not say anything. She was aware of her own body in a particular way. The champagne she'd drunk sitting somewhere in her stomach like a stone. The heels she'd been intending to complain about to Leonardo on the drive home that night. The necklace he had given her on their 10th anniversary pressing against her collarbone. She was aware of these things with enormous, exhausting clarity, the way you notice small physical things when the large ones are too much to hold. Her husband had been alone with her brother-in-law's bride in the bridal suite on the night of the wedding with the door pushed to and the dress undone. She kept putting that sentence together and it kept coming out the same way. At some point, Leonardo reached out and put a hand on Adrian's arm, and Adrian pulled away from it with a force and speed that made Leonardo take a step back, which was a thing that almost never happened, and the sight of that, of her husband stepping back from his younger brother's refusal to be touched, was what finally made the numbness in Isabella's chest begin to crack. She walked out of the room. She made it down the hall and down the stairwell and back out the side entrance before she stopped walking. The stone path glittered under the lanterns. The band was playing something with a waltz tempo. She stood on the path halfway between the house and the tent and breathed. Just breathed, in and out, with the night air coming off the valley and the smell of the vineyard all around her. 200 guests inside that tent. Family, colleagues, people connected to the Moretti name in ways that spanned decades and crossed lines that were never discussed at dinner. A wedding that had been 6 months in the planning. A marriage that had lasted about 4 hours. She pressed both hands flat against her stomach and exhaled. She was going to have to go back in there. She knew that. She was going to have to walk back into that tent and conduct herself with some version of composure. Because that was what the situation required. That was what this life had always required. That was the specific and exhausting tax of being Leonardo Moretti's wife. You learn to carry things without showing the weight. She was still standing on the path when she heard footsteps on the stone behind her. She turned, expecting Leonardo, expecting the careful voice and the managed expression, and the beginning of whatever story he'd decided to tell her. It wasn't Leonardo. It was Giovanni Moretti, 81 years old, suit as immaculate as it had been at 4 in the afternoon, silver hair combed back from a face that had been through things she would never entirely know about. He was walking slowly, one hand on the stone wall for balance, but his eyes were clear and steady and aimed directly at her. He stopped a few feet away. He said, "Come sit with me." She almost said she was fine. She almost said she just needed a moment. She said neither of those things because Giovanni was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face. Not in 20 years of knowing him, not at holidays or funerals, or any of the other events that had tested the Moretti family's capacity for composure. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Giovanni Moretti had never looked physically diminished by anything. He looked tired in the deeper way. In the way of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and is nearly at the end of his strength for it. She followed him to the bench near the rose garden, the old stone bench where she had once watched a much younger Adrian catch fireflies in a jar, while Leonardo and Giovanni stood on the terrace arguing about something she hadn't been close enough to hear. Giovanni sat down with the careful deliberateness of a man who'd learned that every action required intention. She sat beside him. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The music from the tent filtered up through the air. Someone was making an announcement. The toast, probably. The best man's toast. A speech that had likely been written and revised for weeks and was now being delivered to a crowd that didn't know yet what had happened in the room upstairs. "How much do you know?" Giovanni asked. "I walked into the bridal suite." He nodded, not surprised. "And the rest?" She looked at him. "What rest?" Giovanni was quiet for another moment. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed a folded envelope, cream-colored, legal-sized, the kind that comes from a law office or a private firm. He held it in both hands without opening it. "I hired investigators," he said, 8 months ago." She waited. "Not because I suspected the affair." He turned the envelope over in his hands. "I suspected something else. Something that began appearing in the financial records of 3 of the legitimate companies. Small movements at first, the kind of thing you could explain a dozen different ways. But the pattern was there, once you knew how to look." Her mouth had gone dry. "Giovanni, I want you to listen to me carefully." He set the envelope on the bench between them. "What happened in that room upstairs tonight? That is one thing. What I have here, this is something different. This is not about a marriage." He looked at her steadily. "This is about you." She stared at the envelope. "Don't open it here," he said. "Not tonight. But I need you to know that it exists. I need you to know that I have been trying for 2 months to find the right moment to bring this to you, and I have been wrong to wait, and I am sorry for that." "What is in it?" He was quiet for a long time. "Evidence," he finally said, "of what my son has been planning." The band inside the tent shifted into something slower. The best man's toast must have finished. In a minute, someone would notice that the bride and groom had been absent from the reception for a while. In a minute, the questions would start. "He's been moving money," Giovanni said, quietly, like a man confessing something that cost him. "For over a year. Through accounts I didn't know existed. Through companies built to look legitimate and designed to disappear. Adrian's accounts, business accounts. Trust accounts that were meant for family." He paused. "Your account, Isabella. The inheritance trust from your grandmother." The words landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. "That's not all," Giovanni said. She realized she had stopped breathing. She made herself breathe. 6 weeks ago, one of the investigators found a life insurance policy. Giovanni's voice had gone very careful and very steady, the way voices go when what they're saying is almost too much to be said out loud. "Taken out on your life. $2 million. The beneficiary is a shell company connected to one of Leonardo's offshore accounts." He looked at her. "It was taken out 4 months before your birthday." The sound of the reception floated up from the tent, champagne glasses and conversation, and the soft percussion of a party. Isabella looked at the envelope on the bench between them. "There is a flight record," Giovanni said. A private charter, booked 3 weeks ago, for 2 passengers, departing the night after your birthday. The reservation is under a name that isn't Leonardo's, but the credit line it's attached to. He stopped. It traces back. She looked up at him. Giovanni Moretti was one of the few people she had ever known who could hold a terrible thing in his face without letting it break him. He was doing that now, holding it there, behind his eyes, this thing he was telling her, and she could see the cost of it. "Are you telling me," she said, and her voice was steady in the way that things are steady right before they aren't, "that my husband was planning to—" "I'm telling you what the evidence shows." His voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man who understood the weight of the words he was about to confirm. "I'm telling you that I don't believe tonight was only about what you found in that room." The music from the tent shifted again. Isabella looked at the envelope. She thought about the anniversary necklace at her throat. She thought about the cologne she'd bought him every year for 15 years without thinking. She thought about the way he had watched Vivian during the ceremony. Not with desire, she understood now, not only with desire, but with the particular focus of a man tracking the progress of something he'd set in motion. She thought about the flight, departing the night after her birthday, for 2 passengers. She picked up the envelope. Inside the tent, 200 guests were beginning to notice that the bride and groom had been gone too long, that something was off, that the shape of the evening had shifted in a way nobody could name yet. Inside the house on the hill, 2 brothers were still in a room that had once been the happiest room of a wedding day, and the thing that had broken between them was not going to be repaired tonight or next week or perhaps ever. And on a stone bench in a rose garden, the wife of the most feared man in the room was holding an envelope in both hands with the particular stillness of someone who has just understood that the danger they were in was not the kind they had been looking at. She opened it. The first document was a financial record. Pages of transactions, dates, account numbers, amounts transferred in increments designed to stay below reporting thresholds, small enough to look like operating expenses, large enough to add up, over 14 months, to $4.7 million. The second document was a photograph. Leonardo and Vivian at a restaurant she didn't recognize, candid, taken from outside through a window, the 2 of them leaning across a table toward each other in the particular way of people who believe they are not being watched. The date stamp in the corner of the photograph was 11 months ago. The third document was the insurance policy. She read it twice. Her name, the amount, the beneficiary designation and the company name she didn't recognize, and the date the policy had been initiated, which was a Tuesday in February, which she remembered because she and Leonardo had gone to dinner that night, and he'd come home later than expected and told her a meeting had run long. The fourth document was the flight record. 2 passengers. Departure date. Destination. One way. Isabella sat on the stone bench in the rose garden with the documents open in her lap, and the music coming from the tent below, and the night air moving through the vineyard in slow currents, and she did not cry. She was aware of the possibility of crying somewhere in the distance, the way you are aware of a sound in another room, but it didn't arrive. What arrived instead was something colder and cleaner and more durable than tears. She looked up. Giovanni was watching her. She asked, "Who else has seen this?" "My investigators." "Myself." He paused. "I was contacted this afternoon by a federal agent. They've had Leonardo under investigation for financial crimes separately from what I commissioned. They reached out to me. They know about the family's connection to the estate. I believe they intend to move soon." "How soon?" "Tonight," he said quietly. "Possibly tonight." Below them in the tent, the music had stopped. Someone had raised their voice. Several people had, actually. The sound of it carried up the hill even without words, the specific elevated pitch of a crowd that has shifted from celebration to something else. And then, from the direction of the main house, Isabella heard the sound she had been processing before she consciously understood what it was. The sound of multiple car doors, the engine sounds that don't belong to a catering van or a luxury sedan, the kind of vehicles that arrive in a cluster, organized, with purpose. She put the documents back into the envelope. She stood up. Giovanni stood with her, slowly, one hand on the back of the bench. "Isabella." His voice was different now, not the measured delivery of a man managing devastating information, but something older and more worn. "I am sorry. I am sorry for what my son has made of this family. I'm sorry for what he has cost you." She straightened the envelope under her arm. She looked down at the tent, at the lights inside it going golden and confused, at the shapes of 200 guests beginning to move in ways that parties don't move, beginning to turn toward doors, beginning to ask each other questions nobody had answers to yet. She looked at the house on the hill. She looked at the cars arriving at the front gate, 4 of them, moving in deliberate single file, with the steady, unhurried pace of people who already know how the evening ends. "Don't apologize," Isabella said. Her voice was flat and clear and very still. "There's nothing you could have done sooner that would have changed what I needed to find out for myself." She walked toward the house. The envelope was under her arm. The heels were still too tight. The necklace pressed against her collarbone. Inside the tent, the voices were getting louder. At the front gate, the first car had stopped and its doors were opening. And in a room on the upper floor of the Moretti estate, Leonardo was still talking, still arranging, still managing, still building the version of events that would save what could be saved, without knowing yet that the walls he had spent 14 months constructing were already coming down around him, one brick at a time, starting tonight. The first federal agent through the front gate was a woman. Isabella noticed that before anything else, a detail that shouldn't have mattered, and did anyway. The way small specific things become anchors when everything else is moving too fast. The agent was maybe 40, dark coat, hair pulled back, moving with the particular economy of someone who had done this before and didn't need to announce it. She had a badge on her belt and a radio in her left hand, and she was already talking into it before she cleared the gate, her eyes sweeping the estate with the systematic attention of someone reading a room they'd studied on paper for a long time. 3 more vehicles behind her, men in dark jackets fanning out in practiced patterns. Isabella stood on the stone path and watched them come. She was holding the envelope, and her heels were still too tight, and somewhere behind her the sounds coming from the reception tent had crossed the specific threshold where confusion becomes panic. Not the loud kind, not screaming, but the dense, urgent murmur of 200 people all trying to understand the same thing at once. The woman agent saw Isabella and changed her direction. "Ma'am?" She stopped 3 feet away. Neutral voice. Eyes that cataloged without broadcasting what they found. "Are you Isabella Moretti?" "Yes." "My name is Special Agent Dana Reyes. I need you to stay out here for the moment." A brief pause. "Is your husband inside the main house?" Isabella looked at the envelope under her arm, then at Agent Reyes. "He was upstairs," she said, 20 minutes ago." Reyes nodded once, already turning, already lifting the radio. She said something into it that Isabella didn't catch. 2 of the agents split off toward the side entrance, the same door Isabella had walked through an hour ago, the door that had been standing open, the door that had changed everything. Isabella did not move. Giovanni came up beside her, walking slowly, one hand on her shoulder for a moment, and then not. A brief contact, the weight of it saying something his voice didn't. "Go to the tent," he said quietly. "The guests need—" "No." She didn't look at him. She was watching the agents move through the estate entrance. "Not yet." "Isabella." "Not yet, Giovanni." He was quiet. He stood beside her in the dark, and neither of them spoke, and the lights from the reception tent threw long gold shapes across the grass, and somewhere up in the house, behind a window on the second floor that Isabella could see from where she stood, a light came on, and then went off again quickly. Then there were voices from upstairs. Not words, just the sound of voices, male, overlapping, with a particular compressed quality that meant someone was trying to keep them low and not entirely succeeding. Then silence. Then Leonardo appeared in the doorway of the main entrance. He was flanked by 2 agents. He had put his jacket back on and buttoned it. His tie was straight. He was walking under his own power, with his hands not yet restrained, and his face was a thing she had to look at carefully to read, because Leonardo had spent 30 years learning to offer people a face they couldn't use against him, and even now, in this moment, that training was operating. But she knew that face. She had slept beside it for 15 years. She could see through the architecture of it to the thing underneath. He was afraid. Not of the agents beside him, not of the handcuffs that weren't on yet but would be. He was afraid of something that had nothing to do with the law. He was afraid of her. He was looking at her from across the stone path with an expression that was fear and calculation and something older and more ragged underneath both of those. And for one specific second, she had the overwhelming sensation of being completely unknown to him, as if she were looking at a stranger wearing her husband's face. He said her name, just her name. One word. The way you say something when you don't know what comes after it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. That was all. She heard him say something to one of the agents, heard the agent respond. A brief exchange, procedural, the specific cadence of rights being explained and understood. She did not turn around. She heard footsteps on the stone going toward one of the vehicles. A car door. She looked at the vineyard, at the rows of vines in the dark, perfectly spaced, trained to grow along the lines someone else had laid down for them. She breathed. Behind her, the car door closed. Inside the reception tent, it had gone very quiet. The particular silence of a large group of people who have collectively decided to hold still and wait. Someone had finally turned the band off. The caterers had stopped moving. Through the translucent panels of the tent, Isabella could see the silhouettes of 200 guests standing in small clusters, heads turned toward the windows, trying to see what was happening outside. She walked toward the tent. She pushed through the entrance, and the silence hit her differently from inside, denser, warmer, threaded with the smell of food and wine, and too many people in a contained space. 200 faces turned toward her with the specific expression that crowds get when the person they've been waiting for has finally arrived. She did not allow herself to stop in the entrance. She walked to the center of the room. "The evening is over," she said. Her voice carried. It wasn't loud, but it had the weight of something that didn't need to be loud. "There has been a family matter. Transportation will be arranged for anyone who needs it. Please gather your things." No one asked questions. That was the thing about this particular crowd. These were not people who asked questions when a Moretti said something with that specific tone. These were people who understood what it meant when the architecture of an evening changed shape without warning. They were already reaching for their coats. Isabella turned and walked back out of the tent. She was halfway up the stone path when she heard Vivian. She hadn't thought about Vivian in the last 15 minutes, which was strange, except that there had been other things consuming the available space in her mind. But now she heard her, not from upstairs, from the garden, the rose garden, the same bench where she'd sat with Giovanni. Vivian's voice at a register that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite not, saying something to someone in short, broken sentences. Isabella went to the garden. Vivian was sitting on the stone bench in her wedding dress. The train pooled around her feet on the grass, the back of the gown still not fully zipped, a detail that had apparently not been resolved in all the time since Isabella had walked into the bridal suite. She was on her phone. Or she had been on her phone. The phone was in her lap now, and she was looking up at Isabella with an expression that went through 5 things too fast to catch them all. "Where is he?" Isabella asked. Vivian understood she was not asking about Leonardo. "I don't know. He left after—" She stopped. "After everything. He just left." Isabella looked at her, at the dress, at the phone in her lap. "How long?" she asked. Vivian looked up. "What?" "How long have you been with my husband?" The word husband landed in the air between them, and neither of them looked away from it. Vivian's chin dropped slightly. 14 months. Did you know about the money? A pause. A particular kind of pause. The kind where someone is deciding not between telling the truth and lying, but between 2 different versions of the truth. "Some of it," Vivian said. "What part?" "He told me he had accounts, private investments, that there would be enough for both of us when—" She stopped again. "When what, Vivian?" Vivian looked at the grass. "When we left." The night air moved through the rose garden. Somewhere at the front of the estate, an engine started. One of the federal vehicles, pulling out. "He told you you were leaving together?" Isabella said. "Yes." "Where?" "Italy, originally. Then he changed it. Portugal. He said we'd spend the first year in Lisbon, and then—" She stopped. She must have heard something in her own voice that made her stop. "He made plans. He told me about them. I believed him." Isabella stood very still. "Did he tell you why he needed Adrian to get married first?" Vivian was quiet for a very long time. "The trust," she said finally. The word came out small and specific. "Adrian has a secondary trustee position on a family account. Leonardo needed a signature. He said it was a transfer for tax purposes. He said Adrian would sign it if... She stopped. He needed Adrian distracted. He said if Adrian was newly married and focused on... Stop. Vivian stopped. Isabella was aware of her own hands. She looked down at them briefly. The left one with the ring she'd been wearing for 15 years. The right one with the envelope she was still holding had been holding this whole time like it was something she might drop if she relaxed her grip. Do you know what else is in here? Isabella asked. She held up the envelope. Vivian looked at it. No. An insurance policy, Isabella said. On my life. $2 million. Beneficiary is a shell company. It was taken out 4 months before my birthday. She watched Vivian's face very carefully. There's also a flight record. One way. Departing the day after my birthday. 2 passengers. The blood left Vivian's face. Not gradually. All at once. I was one passenger, Isabella said. Or I wasn't. I don't know yet which interpretation is correct, but I know that the flight was booked for 2 people, and my husband's name is not on the manifest, and I know that someone took out a very large policy on my life before he intended to travel somewhere with you, and I know that the date of departure was the day after my birthday. She paused. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to understand that what you say in the next 10 seconds will determine every decision I make from this point forward. Did he tell you why the departure date was set for that specific day? Vivian's mouth was open. She said, he told me, and then her voice broke. Not the soft kind of break, the structural kind, the kind that comes when something has actually given way. He told me that after your birthday there would be some paperwork finalized. He said after that we could go. I didn't ask about... She pressed a hand over her mouth. Her eyes had gone glassy and wide. Oh, God. Don't. Isabella's voice was flat. Stay with me. Did he ever tell you explicitly that something was going to happen to me? No. The word came out fast and raw. No. I swear I knew about the money. I knew about us leaving. I didn't know about any... I wouldn't have... Vivian. She stopped. I don't know yet what you knew, Isabella said. The people who just left in those cars are going to spend a significant amount of time finding out. What I know right now, tonight, standing in front of you, is that you helped him access my brother-in-law's financial information. You participated in this wedding as a performance designed to allow him to steal from this family. And you have been sleeping with my husband for over a year. She looked at her steadily. Whatever you didn't know, and I'm not saying you're lying, I'm saying I don't know, doesn't change any of that. Vivian's hand was still over her mouth. If you cooperate with the investigators, Isabella said, do it because it's the right thing. Not because you think it makes us even. It doesn't make us even. She walked out of the rose garden. She found Adrian sitting on the steps of the side entrance, tie loosened, jacket folded across his knees, staring at the middle distance with the focused emptiness of someone whose mind has gone somewhere their face can't follow. He was still in his wedding suit. The boutonniere had fallen off at some point. His shoes were muddy at the toe from somewhere. The grass, probably. The garden. Wherever he'd gone in the time between leaving the bridal suite and ending up here. He looked up when he heard her. She sat down beside him on the steps. For a while, neither of them spoke. The estate was quieting. The guests had mostly gone. The catering staff was breaking things down in that quiet professional way they had. The remaining federal vehicles were idling near the front gate. How long did you know her before you proposed? Isabella asked. Adrian looked at his hands. 7 months. Where did you meet? A conference. In Seattle. He exhaled through his nose. She was there as a guest of someone else. I don't even remember who. She came to the dinner after and we sat across from each other and I thought... He stopped. I thought she was different. She probably wasn't entirely performing, Isabella said. People rarely are. It's easier to get someone to fall in love with you if you let some part of it be real. Adrian looked at her. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No. She paused. Did Leonardo introduce you? Or was it your own introduction at the conference? Silence. She watched his face. Leonardo suggested the conference, Adrian said slowly. He said it would be good for the business development side. There was a contact he wanted me to meet. The contact ended up not being there. He went quiet. Then slowly, with the particular deliberateness of a man watching something he believed click into place, He gave me the seat assignment for the dinner. Said it was prearranged by the organizers, but he'd had the coordinator adjust the arrangement so I'd be near the people who... He stopped. Adrian. He was staring at his hands again. Adrian. He introduced us, he said. Not loud. Barely audible. He introduced us and I didn't even... He pressed both hands flat on his thighs. 7 months. I proposed to a woman that my brother installed in front of me, and I never once... Stop. She put her hand over his. Stop doing that. Not tonight. He looked at her. His eyes were dry, which was somehow worse than if they hadn't been. What do I do with this? You don't do anything with it tonight. She squeezed his hand once. Tonight you breathe. Izzy, I mean it. Tonight you just breathe. Everything else starts tomorrow. He nodded once, stiffly, like a man accepting a sentence. They sat on the steps for another few minutes without talking. The last of the catering trucks pulled away. One of the federal agents came around the corner of the house, saw them, gave a brief nod of acknowledgement, and moved on. The vineyard was dark beyond the lanterns now, just the shapes of things, the rows of vines gone to shadow. Then Giovanni appeared in the doorway above them. He looked down at them both for a moment. Then he said, There is something else. Come inside. The study was a room that had always felt like an argument waiting to happen. Heavy furniture, dark wood, walls covered in framed photographs of the estate at various stages, and the family at various configurations, decades of Moretti family history organized and displayed by someone who understood that the past was not just memory, but leverage. Giovanni went behind the desk. He didn't sit. He stood behind it with both hands on the surface and a thick file folder open in front of him. Isabella and Adrian sat on the opposite side. My investigators found additional documentation this afternoon, Giovanni said, before the ceremony. I made the decision, incorrectly, to wait until after to raise it, because I believed, also incorrectly, that the evening could be allowed to conclude before this was addressed. Adrian said, What is it? Giovanni turned 3 pages of the folder and pushed it across the desk. Adrian leaned forward. Isabella watched his face as he read, watched it go through several things in sequence. Confusion, recognition, a kind of concentrated blankness that meant he was rereading something he didn't want to have read correctly the first time. This is my signature, Adrian said. Yes. On a transfer authorization for the secondary trust. Yes. I didn't sign this. No, Giovanni said. You didn't. Adrian looked up. Someone forged my signature. A very good forgery, Giovanni said. Consistent with your signature across 6 different documents over 11 months. The investigators believe it was done from templates derived from documents you signed legitimately during that same period. Contracts, business correspondence. How much? Giovanni was quiet for a moment. The total across all forged authorizations is approximately $2,300,000. Adrian set the folder down on the desk. He set it down very carefully, the way you handle something when you don't trust what your hands will do if you're not deliberate about them. There's more, Giovanni said. Of course there is, Adrian said. His voice had gone flat. The flatness that comes after too much. 3 of the shell companies created to receive the transferred funds were established using identity documentation in your name, Adrian, not Leonardo's name, yours. Giovanni's voice was measured and deliberate and costing him something. If investigators had moved on the financial crimes without the fuller picture, without the forgery evidence and the identity theft documentation, you would have appeared to be the architect of the fraud. The room was very quiet. Isabella looked at her brother-in-law. Adrian's face had done something new, something she didn't have a clean name for. It wasn't anger, it was past anger, on the other side of it, in the territory where things become very cold and very clear. He was looking at the wall of photographs, the decades of Moretti family history arranged in frames, and his expression was the expression of a man recalculating everything he has ever understood about something. He was going to let me take the fall, Adrian said. Not a question. The evidence suggests that was the contingency, Giovanni said. If the financial movements were discovered before he could leave, the trail would have led to you. He spent 14 months building a frame around me. Adrian's voice was very quiet and very even. 14 months. And then he handed me a bride he'd already... He stopped. He stood up from the chair, He walked to the window and stood with his back to them. Giovanni looked at Isabella. Isabella looked at the folder on the desk, at the forged signatures, at the company names she didn't recognize, and the account numbers that meant nothing to her, but meant everything to the story they told together. "Giovanni," she said, "the life insurance policy." "Yes." "Has Agent Reyes seen it?" "I provided them a full copy of everything my investigators compiled." "All of it," she nodded. "And the flight?" "Yes." "What do they believe the intent was?" Giovanni was quiet for a long moment. He was a man who had seen a great deal, and she had always known this, had always understood in the abstract that the life he had built and the life that had built him were not clean or simple things. But she had never seen him look the way he looked right now, which was like a man who had discovered that the most dangerous thing in his house had been sitting at his table for 15 years. "They believe," he said carefully, "that Leonardo intended to be in another country before anything was discovered. They believe the insurance policy was—" He paused. "They're treating it as part of the financial architecture. Whether there was additional intent behind it is something their investigation will determine." "Additional intent," Adrian said from the window. He didn't turn around. "That's a very careful way to say what you mean." "Adrian, was he going to kill her?" He turned around. "That's the question. That's the actual question on the table right now. Was my brother planning to murder his wife?" The word was in the room now. It had been around the edges of the room for the last hour, had been in the envelope, in the insurance policy, and the one-way flight, and the birthday timing, but it was in the room now, inside the walls, undeniable. Giovanni did not answer immediately, and the silence of a man like Giovanni Moretti, in a moment like this one, was its own kind of answer. Isabella stood up. She set the envelope on the desk beside the open folder. She looked at the photographs on the wall, the estate at Harvest, the family at Christmas years ago, Leonardo at maybe 25 in a suit that was too large for him, laughing at something off camera with his whole face, before whatever he had become had finished becoming it. "It doesn't matter," she said. Both men looked at her. "Whether it was the financial architecture or something else, it doesn't change what I do next." She straightened the envelope on the desk. "It changes what he faces, but it doesn't change me." She walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Adrian asked. "To find Agent Reyes," she said. "I have information she doesn't have yet, about accounts Leonardo kept that aren't in your father's files." She paused in the doorway. "He talked to me about the business, not the specifics. He was never careless enough for specifics, but enough. Over 15 years, enough slips through, things I didn't know I was storing." She looked at her brother-in-law. "I was a very good wife. It turns out that means I was also a very good witness." She walked out of the study. In the hallway, the estate had gone quiet enough that she could hear her own footsteps on the stone floor, the particular sound of heels on old Italian tile, a sound she had heard 100 times in this house at holidays and summer visits, and the long, ordinary weekends of a marriage that had seemed, from inside it, like a life. She pushed through the front door. Agent Reyes was standing by the remaining vehicle, writing something on a clipboard. She looked up when Isabella came down the steps. "Mrs. Moretti," she said. "I have information," Isabella said. "I need however long you need." Reyes studied her face for a moment. Then she opened the vehicle door. "Get in." Isabella got in. The door closed. Inside the house, in the study, Giovanni Moretti stood behind his desk and looked at the folder and the envelope and the wall of photographs, and in the particular silence of a man who had made decisions in his life that he would never be called to account for, and one decision, the decision to wait, to not tell her sooner, to believe the evening could be managed, that was costing him more than any of the others. He picked up the phone. He dialed a number he had not dialed in 3 years. It rang twice. The voice on the other end said his name. Giovanni said, "We have a problem, a large one, and I need to know if you still have access to the channels we used before the reorganization." He paused. "Because there are accounts my investigators didn't find, and I believe Isabella is about to confirm they exist." Another pause. "And I need to know what's in them before the federal government does." He set the phone on the desk and waited. Outside the window, the federal vehicle with Isabella inside it pulled slowly away from the estate. The vineyard was dark. The reception tent stood empty, half its lights already shut off. The chairs still arranged in the rows where 200 guests had sat an hour ago, the floral arrangement still perfect on the tables, the wedding cake untouched on its silver stand. And somewhere in that vehicle, moving down the hill toward the lights of the valley, Isabella Moretti was beginning to talk. And what she knew, what she had absorbed and overheard and been told and carefully not asked about across 15 years of marriage to the most dangerous man in the room, was going to be worse than anything Giovanni's investigators had found. She had always been the person in the room everyone underestimated. She was done with that now. The federal building in San Francisco smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee, and the specific kind of institutional exhaustion that accumulates in a place where bad news is processed 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, year after year, until the walls absorb it. Isabella had been in interview room 4 for 6 hours. She knew it was 6 hours because there was a clock on the wall. Industrial, utilitarian, the kind with a red second hand that moved in discrete ticks rather than a smooth sweep. And she had been watching it with the particular attention of someone who has nothing left to do with their body except notice things. Her heels were off. She'd taken them off somewhere around hour 2 and set them under the chair, and nobody had said anything about it. There was a paper cup of coffee in front of her that had been warm when someone brought it, and was now something else entirely. Agent Reyes sat across the table. She had a yellow legal pad covered in notes, and a voice recorder running on the table between them and the particular quality of attention that Isabella had come to recognize over the last 6 hours. Not aggressive, not soft, somewhere between the two, the attention of someone who understood that the person across from them was giving them something voluntarily, and that the way you receive a gift determines whether you get another one. "Walk me through the Portugal conversation again," Reyes said. Isabella wrapped both hands around the cold coffee cup. It was in March. He'd been on the phone most of the evening. He said it was a client in Milan, but he took the calls in the study with the door closed, which was not unusual, but the frequency was. She paused. When he came to bed, he mentioned Lisbon. He said he'd been looking at property. I asked if we were planning a trip. He said not yet. He said Lisbon was undervalued as a real estate market, and he was thinking about it as an investment. Did he mention a timeline? Not specifically. He said the market window was in the next 18 months. She looked at the clock, which would have put it just past my birthday. Reyes wrote something. And the Milan calls. Did he give you a client name? Caruso. Isabella said it without hesitation. He mentioned Caruso twice. Once in March, once in April. I don't know a Caruso. In 20 years around this business, I've never heard that name, and I know most of the names. Reyes looked up. You're certain? I'm certain. Reyes made a note. She underlined something. She clicked her pen twice in a way that seemed unconscious, a thinking habit, and Isabella had been watching it long enough to know it meant she was processing something that connected to something else. Mrs. Moretti, Reyes said, the accounts you described, the ones your father-in-law's investigators didn't find, you said Leonardo referenced them indirectly. I want to understand the mechanism. How were they structured as far as you understood? He used a layering system. He explained it to me once as a hypothetical. I think now it wasn't hypothetical. I think he was thinking out loud and caught himself and reframed it. He called it distance architecture, the idea being that each layer of a transaction is handled by a separate entity that has no visible connection to the one before it. He said it was a standard offshore protection strategy for high net worth individuals. When was this conversation? 4 years ago, over dinner. We were talking about tax exposure on one of the legitimate real estate holdings, and he explained the concept. I didn't ask follow-up questions because it sounded like business, and I had learned not to ask follow-up questions about business when the answers got technical. Reyes looked at her for a moment. You learned not to ask. Yes. How early in the marriage did you learn that? Isabella was quiet. Early? Reyes nodded, not judgmentally, just noting it. The specific entities you mentioned, the ones you remembered from documents you saw on his desk, I'm going to need those names in writing before you leave tonight. Our financial crimes unit will cross-reference them. I can do that. Good. Reyes set down her pen. This was a shift. Isabella had learned to read the rhythm of the interview in the way you learn to read any repeated pattern, and setting down the pen meant something different than clicking it. I want to talk about the insurance policy. All right. You said when you saw the document, You noticed the initiation date was in February, 4 months before your birthday. Yes. Did anything happen in February that you remember now differently than you understood it at the time? Isabella thought about February. She had been thinking about February off and on for the last 6 hours, turning it over, holding it up to the light of what she now knew, looking at the underside of ordinary days. He was away for 4 days in February, she said. He said it was a business trip, Chicago. He brought me back something from a restaurant there, a box of chocolates from a place he said the client had taken him to. I thought it was thoughtful. She paused. He was very affectionate when he came back, more than usual. I thought he'd missed me. Reyes picked her pen back up. Do you know if he was actually in Chicago? Isabella looked at her hands. The ring on her left hand. She had not taken it off. She was aware of that, had been aware of it for 6 hours, but hadn't addressed it. No, she said. I don't know. There was a knock at the door. A younger agent opened it, mid-30s, tired around the eyes, holding a folder with the specific grip of someone carrying something that has weight. He looked at Reyes and gave a brief nod. Reyes stood, excused herself, stepped into the hallway. The door closed. Isabella sat alone in interview room 4 with the clock and the dead coffee, and the sound of the building at 2 in the morning. The distant percussion of keyboards, a phone ringing somewhere, the specific institutional quiet of a federal building in the middle of the night when the people still inside it are there because they have to be. She looked at the ring. She turned it once around her finger. The metal was warm. It was always warm. She'd forgotten what her hand felt like without it. She was still looking at it when Reyes came back. The younger agent came with her this time. He sat in the chair against the wall. Not at the table, against the wall, which meant he was there to listen, not to conduct. He opened the folder in his lap and kept his eyes on it. Reyes sat down across from Isabella. Something had changed in her face. Not dramatically. She was too controlled for dramatic. But Isabella had been watching that face for 6 hours, and she could see the alteration, a compression around the eyes, a specific quality of stillness. Mrs. Moretti, Reyes said, I need to tell you something, and I want you to understand that what I'm about to share is part of an active investigation, and some of it is preliminary. Tell me, the name Caruso that you mentioned, we ran it against our existing case files as a precaution while we were talking. There is no client named Caruso in any of the business records associated with the Moretti companies, but the name does appear in our investigation. She paused. Marco Caruso is a financial intermediary based in Zurich. He specializes in structuring assets for high-risk clients. He has worked with 3 individuals currently under federal indictment for wire fraud and money laundering. Another pause. He was contracted by your husband approximately 16 months ago. 16 months. 2 months before the affair began by Vivian's account. How much did he move? Isabella asked. We're still tracing the full picture. Current confirmed figure is approximately $11 million. Reyes watched her face carefully. Across 4 jurisdictions. Isabella absorbed this the way you absorb a physical impact. Not by not feeling it, but by letting the body process it while the mind keeps moving. The distance architecture, she said. Yes, it's well constructed. We would not have found the Caruso connection without your information about the Milan calls. The phone records will take time to subpoena and verify, but if they show contact with Zurich during those calls rather than Milan, they will, Isabella said. Reyes looked at her. He was careful, Isabella said, but he was comfortable. He'd been comfortable for a long time. Comfortable people make small mistakes. She picked up the cold coffee and put it down again. He told me about Lisbon. He shouldn't have told me about Lisbon. He said it because he was already living in the future and the future seemed safe. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she said, There's something else. The younger agent against the wall turned a page in his folder without looking up. We executed a search of the secondary property, Reyes said, the condominium in Pacific Heights that is registered to one of the shell companies. She paused. Your name is not on the deed. We believe this property was being used as a meeting location by your husband and Ms. Cross. All right. Inside the property, our agents found a safe. The combination was provided by Ms. Cross, who has been cooperating since approximately midnight. Reyes set both hands flat on the table. Inside the safe, there were documents, Mrs. Moretti. Documents we were not expecting. Isabella waited. There were 2 passports, Reyes said. Both legitimate. Both issued within the last 8 months. Both bearing photographs of your husband. She paused with the specific deliberateness of someone choosing their words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. They are not in the name Leonardo Moretti. They are in 2 different names that our documents division has confirmed were obtained through a broker who specializes in what is called legend construction. Complete false identities with verifiable documentation histories. The clock on the wall ticked. The second hand moved. Isabella said, "He was never planning to come back." "No," Reyes said. "We don't believe he was." The Caruso accounts. $11 million in 4 jurisdictions. 2 identities, a one-way flight. She was organizing it out loud, not for Reyes, for herself, laying the pieces on a surface she could see. The wedding was the last transaction. He needed Adrian's trust signature, and he needed time to finalize the transfer with Caruso before he moved the accounts to a structure we couldn't trace. The wedding gave him both. Adrian was distracted, the family's attention was on the event, and the celebration was cover for meetings he had the afternoon before the ceremony, Reyes said. "We found his phone. The encrypted messages are still being analyzed, but the metadata shows activity in the 3 hours between the rehearsal dinner and the ceremony." Isabella looked at the table. "He was working," she said. Not surprised, just saying it. "On the day of his brother's wedding, he was finalizing the transfers." "Yes." She looked up. "And Vivian? What does Vivian know about the passports?" "She says she knew about one of them. She says she believed it was a precaution, that he had told her the single false identity was in case the financial movements were discovered and he needed to travel quickly. She says she did not know about the second passport." "A second legend," Isabella said. "Yes. For her," Isabella said. "He had a second identity built for her. She just didn't know he'd kept it from her." "That is our interpretation." Isabella looked at her hands again. The ring. The bare skin above it where she'd been touching it without realizing, her thumb moving in a small arc like a person trying to feel if something is real. "He had documents built for both of them," she said slowly, "and he kept hers from her, which means—" She stopped. She thought about the life insurance policy, the $2 million, the birthday, the flight. "Which means she wasn't the second passenger on that flight," Isabella said. The room was very quiet. "We don't know that," Reyes said carefully. "You said the flight was booked for 2 passengers under names that aren't Leonardo's." "Yes. And you found 2 false identities in the safe. One Vivian knew about, one she didn't." "Yes. So either Vivian was the second passenger using an identity she didn't know she had, or—" She stopped again. Reyes said, "Or the second passenger was someone else." The clock ticked. Isabella's thumb had stopped moving on the ring. "Who else?" she said. Not a question. "Who else was he—" She caught it before it finished. She sat back in the chair. She pressed one hand flat on the table. "There's another person." Reyes did not confirm or deny. "The investigation is ongoing. Agent Reyes, Mrs. Moretti. Is there another person?" The younger agent against the wall turned another page. He was not reading it. Reyes looked at Isabella for a long moment. Then she said, "We have found communications suggesting a third relationship, a woman in Seattle. The communications go back approximately 2 years." A pause. "Prior to Ms. Cross." The room did not move. The clock moved. The building breathed its recycled air. Somewhere a phone rang twice and stopped. Isabella sat with this for a moment. Then she laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was not a breakdown sound either. It was something between and underneath both of those. A short, exhaled, almost incredulous sound. The sound of a person who has been holding an enormous amount of structural weight and has just discovered the building had another floor she didn't know about. "Of course," she said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She straightened in the chair, rolled her shoulders. "What's her name?" "I'm not able to share that at this stage." "Does she know what he was planning?" "We're in the process of determining—" "Oh, does she know about Vivian?" Reyes paused. Based on the communications, no. It appears she believed she was the only, so he had three of us, Isabella said, running simultaneously, me, Vivian, and someone in Seattle. And Vivian thought she was the escape plan, and the woman in Seattle thought, what? What did she think? Based on the messages we've recovered, she believed he was planning to leave his marriage, that there were complications delaying the timeline, that the complications were being resolved. The complications were being resolved, Isabella repeated. The complications being me. We don't know. Stop protecting me from the conclusion, Isabella said. Her voice had gone hard and even, the kind of voice that doesn't rise because it doesn't need to. I have been sitting in this room for 6 hours. I have given you information that your investigation did not have. I would like you to extend me the courtesy of the actual truth. Reyes held her gaze for a moment. Then she said, the communications between your husband and the woman in Seattle suggest he represented to her that his marriage would be resolved before the end of the year. The specific language he used was, the situation will be handled. The situation will be handled. Isabella looked at the ring one more time. She took it off. She set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it there, small and gold and warm from her hand, a thing that had been part of her body for 15 years. And then she set it to the edge of the table and left it there. What charges, she said, will he face? Reyes looked at the ring, then at Isabella. Wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, conspiracy. The forgery counts against Adrian are separate charges. The financial crimes alone carry substantial federal sentencing exposure. A pause. The insurance policy and the flight manifest are being reviewed by a separate unit. I cannot tell you yet what additional charges may result from that review. But you're looking at it. Yes. And the woman in Seattle, will she be charged with anything? That depends on what we find. If she received funds she knew to be... I don't care about her, Isabella said. I want to know if she's at risk. Reyes studied her. At risk. He told her the complications were being handled. That's the same language, essentially, as a $2 million life insurance policy and a one-way flight. If he had another... She stopped. If the Seattle situation was the actual endpoint, and Vivian was a tool and I was an obstacle, then the woman in Seattle is somewhere thinking she's waiting on a man to finalize his divorce. She looked at Reyes steadily. Or she's somewhere that I should be worried about. Reyes picked up her radio. The conversation she had into it was brief and clipped, and the younger agent against the wall was on his phone before Reyes had finished. Within 90 seconds, the room had a different quality to it. The kind of directed urgency that fills a space when people with purpose have somewhere to be. Reyes stood. I need to step out. We'll continue in... The door opened before she reached it. The agent who came through was not the young one from before. This one was older, heavier, with the specific exhausted authority of someone very senior who had come in from somewhere else at 2 a.m. and was not pleased about it, but understood why. He looked at Reyes. He looked at Isabella. He pulled Reyes into the hallway. Isabella sat alone again. She looked at the ring on the edge of the table. She thought about the woman in Seattle, a woman she didn't know, whose name she hadn't been given, who was somewhere right now in her own life, her ordinary 2 a.m. life, sleeping or working or sitting by a window waiting for a text from a man she believed was coming for her. A woman who didn't know that the architect of her future had been running 3 separate futures simultaneously and had designated one of them, possibly 2 of them, as problems to be resolved. She picked the ring up, put it in her coat pocket. Not on her finger, not thrown away, just somewhere else for now. Reyes came back in. She sat down. Her face had changed again, more significantly this time. Whatever had been said in the hallway had landed hard. What happened? Isabella said. Ms. Cross, Reyes said. She's been talking to us for the last 2 hours, as you know. Approximately 15 minutes ago, she provided additional information. Reyes set both hands on the table. She says she found something in the Pacific Heights property 6 weeks ago, before the wedding. A notebook, handwritten, in a code she didn't understand at the time, but partially decoded in the weeks since. What kind of code? A simple substitution. The kind someone uses when they're writing things they don't want found, but aren't thinking about seriously as a security risk because they're working alone. Reyes paused. The notebook contains what appear to be logistical notes, dates, times, location references. For what? For several things we're still interpreting, but one section, Reyes stopped. She pressed her lips together briefly. One section contains what appears to be research on medication interactions, specifically on medications that are difficult to detect in a standard toxicology panel. Another pause. Your name appears in the same section. The clock ticked. The second hand moved in its discrete mechanical arcs. Isabella sat with this the way she had sat with the insurance policy, letting it arrive, letting the body process it while the mind kept going, the way you keep walking after you've been hit because stopping is worse than moving. He wasn't planning to use the flight, she said. Her voice was very steady. It surprised her. The flight was for Vivian, or for the Seattle woman. The insurance policy was the real plan. Reyes said, "We don't—" "Stop." Isabella held up one hand. "Don't tell me you don't know. You know enough. You know what the notebook says, and you know what the policy says, and you know what the flight says, and you're looking at me right now the way you look at someone when you're about to tell them that the danger they thought was in the past is still—" She stopped. She looked at Reyes. "He's in federal custody," she said. "Yes. As of tonight. Yes." "So the immediate—" "You are not in immediate danger," Reyes said. "He is in custody. The Pacific Heights property has been secured. The Caruso accounts have been frozen pending the subpoenas." She held Isabella's gaze. "But I want you to understand the full picture of what we're looking at. And I want you to understand that your cooperation tonight has significantly changed the trajectory of this case." Isabella looked at the table where the ring had been. She thought about 15 years. She was going to have to stop doing that, thinking about 15 years as a single unit, as a thing with coherence. She was going to have to go back through it and understand which parts were real and which parts were constructed and which parts were both. And that was going to take a very long time, and she was not going to do it tonight. Tonight she was going to do what the moment required. "What do you need from me?" she said. Reyes pulled the yellow legal pad toward her. "I need the financial entity names in writing. I need you to walk me through every business conversation you can remember from the last 2 years in as much detail as possible. And I need you to tell me everything you know about the period 4 months before your birthday. Specifically, anything that seemed off, anything that seemed overly affectionate or overly attentive, anything that seemed like someone managing you toward a specific state of mind." Managing you toward a specific state of mind. Isabella thought about the chocolates from Chicago, the increased affection, the way he had in recent months started asking her more often if she was happy, if she had everything she needed, if there was anything she wanted to do or change or add to her life. She had thought he was trying. She had thought something in the marriage was softening. She had taken it as a sign that the distance she'd felt between them was closing. She understood now that you don't ask a person if they have everything they need unless you're calculating what they'll leave behind. "He asked me in March if I had updated my own will," she said quietly. Reyes went very still. "I told him no. I said I'd been meaning to and hadn't gotten around to it. He said I should think about it. He said it was responsible." She looked up. "I thought he was being practical. He was always practical about those things. Legal documents, estate planning. He took it seriously." She stopped. "He knew I hadn't updated it. He knew the terms from before our marriage were still in effect, which means the existing will may have had provisions that—" "I left everything to my father," Isabella said, "from the original will, before the marriage. I kept meaning to update it, and I never—" She stopped. She pressed the back of her hand briefly against her mouth. 1 second. Then she put the hand back on the table. "My father has been dead for 6 years." The room held it. "If I had died before updating the will," she said carefully, "the assets would have entered probate. The inheritance trust from my grandmother, which Leonardo had already raided, would have been caught up in that process, except that the insurance policy wouldn't go through probate. It would go directly to the beneficiary." "Yes," Reyes said, "to the shell company. To him." She looked at the legal pad, or to whoever he'd designated to receive it, operating under a name that isn't his. She picked up the pen Reyes had set on the table. She pulled the legal pad toward her. She began to write. The names she'd overheard, The account structures he'd explained as hypotheticals, the Caruso calls that weren't from Milan, every conversation that had seemed like business and nothing else, every detail she had absorbed in 15 years of marriage and filed somewhere without knowing she was filing it, every small thing that had not made sense at the time and made devastating sense. She wrote for 2 hours, not in the careful, considered way of someone composing a statement, in the raw, continuous way of someone emptying a container they didn't know was full, names and dates and account structures and overheard phone calls and the names of restaurants where meetings happened and the addresses of properties she'd driven past without asking why they were driving past them. All of it coming out in the specific, disordered sequence of real memory, which doesn't organize itself chronologically, but by association, one thing pulling another, the way a thread pulls when you find the right end. Reyes sat across from her and didn't interrupt. The younger agent against the wall filled half a legal pad of his own. At 4:15 in the morning, Isabella set down the pen. Her hand was cramping, had been cramping for the last 30 minutes, but she'd ignored it. She flexed her fingers, looked at what she'd written. 8 pages of names and numbers, and fragments of conversations reconstructed from the specific kind of memory that belongs to people who have trained themselves to be unobtrusive in rooms where important things are said. "There's one more thing," she said. Reyes looked up. "The Hartwell Group." Isabella pressed her fingers flat on the table to ease the cramping. "It's a real estate holding company. Legitimate, on paper. Leonardo set it up 11 years ago. I signed documents connected to it twice, once at the beginning of the marriage, once about 4 years ago. Both times he said it was a tax structure reorganization." She paused. "The second time he had me sign at home, not at a lawyer's office. He said it was routine. He had a notary come to the house." Reyes had gone very still. "I didn't read what I signed," Isabella said. "That's the truth. I trusted him, and I didn't read it." She looked at the table. "But I remember the notary's name. It was on the stamp, Petrov, a woman. And I remember she seemed nervous, which I noticed and didn't think about again until right now." Reyes picked up her radio before Isabella had finished the sentence. What happened in the next 40 minutes happened fast, in the way that institutional things sometimes move fast when the right information hits the right people. Doors opening and closing, voices in hallways, the older senior agent appearing again with 2 people Isabella hadn't seen before. The 4 of them standing in the corridor outside interview room 4, speaking in the compressed urgent shorthand of people who know each other's thinking well enough to communicate in fragments. Isabella sat inside with the cramped hand and the 8 pages and the dead coffee. She was not afraid. She noted this without pride or analysis, just noted it the way you note the weather. She had been afraid earlier tonight, in the rose garden, in the specific hollow way of someone who has understood that the danger is not abstract. Now something had replaced the fear. Not courage, exactly. More like the particular clarity that comes when the last layer of uncertainty has been removed and what remains, however terrible, is at least known. The door opened. Reyes came back in. She sat down. She had the look of someone who has just confirmed something they were hoping was wrong. "The Hartwell Group," Reyes said. "We have a partial flag on it from a related investigation. We weren't looking at it directly because the connection wasn't clear. What you've just given us—" She stopped. "Mrs. Moretti, if the document you signed 4 years ago transferred any ownership interest or signatory authority to entities connected to the Caruso structure, you may have been used as an unwitting vehicle for part of the money movement." The words landed. "He used my signature," Isabella said. "Possibly. We need to verify the document. He used my signature the same way he used Adrian's. We don't know yet." "I know," Isabella said. Her voice didn't rise. "I know because that's how he operates. That's the architecture. Distribute the liability. Build frames around the people closest to you so that if anything collapses, you're standing inside someone else's structure." She looked at Reyes directly. "Am I going to be charged with anything?" Reyes held her gaze. "Your cooperation tonight, combined with the evidence of your role as an unwitting party, makes that extremely unlikely. But I want to be honest with you. There will be a period of investigation during which your status will be technically unresolved. Your attorney should be present for—" "I don't have an attorney." "You need one. Today. Before you leave this building." Reyes said it with the directness of someone giving advice they mean. "Not because you're a target, Because this case is going to get very large very fast, and you need someone in your corner who speaks the language. Isabella nodded. All right. Reyes looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite professional distance, something that had worn through at the edges over the course of 6 hours. You should know, she said, that what you gave us tonight is not a small thing. The Caruso connection alone opens 3 additional lines of investigation that we didn't have access to before. The notebook from the Pacific Heights property combined with your testimony about the medication conversation. I didn't know about the notebook. No, but your testimony about the March conversation, the Lisbon property, the 18-month timeline, corroborates the notebook entries in a way that will be significant in court. She paused. You built a case tonight, Mrs. Moretti, without intending to. Over 15 years. Isabella looked at the 8 pages on the table. Get some sleep, Reyes said. We'll need you back in 2 days for a formal recorded statement. Bring an attorney. Isabella stood. She picked up her heels from under the chair. She did not put them on. She carried them. She walked out of the federal building at 4:53 in the morning in her stocking feet, heels in one hand, coat pulled around her against the cold San Francisco air, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the street, the empty pre-dawn street with its orange sodium lights, and a delivery truck idling at the corner and the city beginning its first almost imperceptible shift toward morning. She called a car. She waited on the sidewalk. She did not call Leonardo. She was aware of this as a specific act, the absence of the automatic reaching for the phone to tell him where she was, the 15-year habit of their partnership suddenly visible now as a habit rather than a need. She had been reaching for him without thinking for 15 years. She was done reaching. The car came. She got in. She gave the address of the Napa estate. She slept for 90 minutes on the drive. When she woke up, the valley was beginning to go gray-pink at the horizon, and the estate was ahead of them at the top of the hill, and the reception tent was still standing in the gray light below the main house. Half its walls collapsed now, but still there, a deflated monument to the previous evening. She looked at it as the car went up the drive. She looked at it without feeling what she expected to feel, which was nothing conclusive. Just the steady, slightly nauseating clarity of someone who is very tired and very awake. Adrian's car was in the drive. He was in the kitchen when she came in, still in the wedding suit, jacket off, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and his phone face down in front of him. He looked up when she came through the door, and something in his face shifted. Relief, or a version of it, the relief of someone who has been waiting without knowing they were waiting. You were there all night, he said. Yes. Are you? He stopped. He looked at her face. He didn't finish the question, which meant the answer was visible. She set her heels by the door. She sat down across from him. She put both hands on the table. He forged your signature on 8 separate documents, she said, over 11 months. He built company structures in your name that were designed to make you look like the primary architect of the fraud if the investigation moved before he could leave. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hands wrapped around the glass. He introduced you to Vivian deliberately, she continued. The Seattle conference was arranged. The seating at the dinner was arranged. Vivian was the mechanism for accessing your trust accounts, but the wedding itself was also cover. It gave him a reason for a large family gathering at the estate where he could conduct the final transfers without anyone asking why there was unusual financial activity. He used our wedding, Adrian said. Not loud. Barely loud at all. Yes. He used it as a... He stopped. He set the glass down carefully. He built a stage for us. The ceremony, the guests, He built the whole thing as cover. Yes. Adrian pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at them. He was very still, in the way that people are still when what they're holding is too large for movement. There's a woman in Seattle, Isabella said. The agents found communications. The relationship predates Vivian by about 6 months. She doesn't know about any of this. Adrian looked up. He told her the marriage was being resolved, Isabella said. That's the language they found. The complications were being handled. He had a second false identity in the Pacific Heights safe, a passport, documentation. We believe it was built for her. Adrian stared at her. So Vivian was... I don't know what Vivian was. I don't think Leonardo had a clean plan. I think he had multiple contingencies running simultaneously, and he was managing them the way he managed everything, by compartmentalizing, by keeping each part from seeing the others, by believing he was the only person in the room with the full picture. She paused. He was. Until last night. The kitchen was quiet. The valley light was coming through the window now, pale, spreading, the particular quality of early morning light in wine country that makes everything look like it's been stilled for a photograph. What happens now? Adrian said. Now he faces trial, Isabella said, and we cooperate with the investigation, and we rebuild what can be rebuilt. She looked at him steadily. The estate is not in his name. You know that. Giovanni structured it that way 20 years ago, and whatever else your father was, and whatever else he did, that decision is protecting us right now. Adrian nodded slowly. And you? What do you rebuild? She thought about it. Everything, she said, from the original materials. She went upstairs. She showered. She put on clothes that were not last night's clothes. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long moment, not looking at herself particularly, just standing there, letting the hot water clear from the mirror, watching her own face appear in the steam. She went back downstairs. Giovanni was in the study. He'd been there, she understood, most of the night. There was a blanket folded on the arm of the chair that someone had brought him, and that he hadn't used, and 3 empty coffee cups on the desk, and the folder open to the same page it had been opened to when she'd left with Agent Reyes 12 hours ago. He looked up when she came in. Sit down, he said. She sat. I spoke with my attorneys, he said, 3 hours ago. I also spoke with the man I called last night, the one I called after you left. He folded his hands on the desk. His voice was the voice of a man preparing to say something he has been preparing to say for a long time. I need to tell you something about the Hartwell Group. Something in her chest went very still. I know what it is, she said. Giovanni looked at her. Agent Reyes told me. They flagged it. They think Leonardo may have used a document I signed 4 years ago to move money through it. She watched the old man's face. But that's not what you're about to tell me. Giovanni was quiet. Giovanni. He looked at his hands, then at her. The Hartwell Group was not entirely Leonardo's creation, he said. He built on a structure that already existed, a structure I created many years ago for reasons that I believed at the time were necessary. He paused. Reasons that I am not going to ask you to excuse. The morning light was coming through the study window now, full and clear and without mercy. The kind of light that shows everything. You built the original shell structure, Isabella said. Yes, and Leonardo found it. He always knew it existed. I told him when he was 30, I was beginning to retire from certain activities, and I wanted the family to understand the full picture of what I was stepping back from. Giovanni's voice had gone to the specific flatness of an old man telling the truth he has avoided for a long time. He took that knowledge and he used it. He built inside what I had built. By the time I understood what he was doing, he had constructed enough distance between my original structure and his additions that any investigation would hit his layer first. Psychops. He used you, Isabella said, the same way he used me. The same way he used Adrian. Yes, the word cost him. She could see it. And I allowed it because I believed, I told myself, that I didn't have evidence of specific wrongdoing, that what I suspected was not the same as what I knew. He looked at her. I was wrong. I was a coward. And by the time I commissioned the investigators, the damage was already... Giovanni? She held up one hand. I'm not going to tell you that's forgivable or that it isn't. I don't have the energy for that right now. She looked at the folder on the desk. What I need to know is whether the federal investigation is going to find your original structure. Yes, he said quietly. They will. And when they do, I intend to cooperate fully. He said it simply, without drama. I spoke to my attorneys about this tonight. I am 81 years old. I am not going to spend the remainder of my life in legal evasion. He looked at her steadily. I will cooperate. I will accept the consequences, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that you and Adrian are protected from the legal fallout of what I built and what my son built inside it. Isabella sat with this. She looked at the photographs on the wall, the estate at Harvest, the family, the decades of Moretti history in frames. She looked at the photo of Leonardo at 25 in the too large suit, laughing with his whole face. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell your attorneys to reach out to Agent Reyes today, before noon." "Yes, and tell them to be completely honest about the timeline of the original structure, the full timeline, not the version that minimizes exposure, the real one." "Yes. Because if they find inconsistencies between your account and the documents, it will come back on Adrian. And I will not allow Adrian to be caught in the aftermath of one more thing that the men in this family built." Giovanni looked at her with something she didn't have a clean name for. It was not pride exactly. It was something older than pride. "No," he said quietly. "Neither will I." She stood up. She was at the door when he said her name. She turned. "The day you married Leonardo," Giovanni said, "I told him he had found someone better than he deserved." He paused. "I want you to know that I meant it then, and I mean it more now." She looked at him for a moment. Then she walked out. She was in the hallway when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. "Mrs. Moretti." A man's voice. Tight, controlled. The voice of someone calling from somewhere they don't want to be identified. "My name is not important. What is important is that I work with certain financial structures that your husband engaged for specific services, and I am aware that he is currently in federal custody." She stopped walking. "I am also aware," the voice continued, "that you have been speaking with federal investigators. I want to be clear with you about something. The accounts your husband built, not the Caruso accounts, the ones beneath those, contain information about transactions that involve people who are not Leonardo Moretti and are not in federal custody and do not intend to be." She stood in the hallway and did not speak. "These people are not interested in harming you," the voice said. "They are interested in ensuring that certain information does not become part of the federal record. If you have provided or intend to provide information about account structures below the Caruso layer, I am calling to suggest that you consider very carefully—" "Who are you?" Isabella said. "I told you. I heard what you told me. I'm asking you again." Silence. "You called me directly," she said, "on my personal cell phone, which means you have access to information that isn't in a public directory, which means you're connected to the network my husband built, which means you're already inside the federal investigation, whether you know it yet or not." She paused. "So I'll ask one more time. Who are you?" A longer silence. "Someone," the voice said, "who does not want this to go further than it needs to." "It's already gone further than it needs to," Isabella said. "Call a lawyer." She ended the call. She stood in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then she called Reyes. Reyes picked up on the second ring, which meant she hadn't slept either. "I just received a call," Isabella said. "Unknown number, male voice. He referenced account structures below the Caruso layer. He knows I spoke to you. He knows enough to have my personal cell number." She paused. "He said there are people involved who are not in custody and do not intend to be." She heard Reyes straighten, heard the quality of attention on the other end shift into something faster and more directed. "Don't go anywhere," Reyes said. "I'm at the estate. Stay there. I'm sending someone. Don't answer any more unknown calls. Let them go to voicemail. We'll need the record." A pause. "Are you all right?" Isabella looked down the hallway, at the morning light coming through the window at the end of it, at the framed photographs of the estate, at the door to the study where Giovanni was making calls that might define the last chapter of his life. "Yes," she said. She wasn't sure it was true. She said it anyway. She went to the kitchen. Adrian was still at the table. She sat down across from him. She set her phone face up on the table between them. "Someone called me," she said, "connected to layers of this that are below what the investigation has found so far. People who aren't in custody." She looked at Adrian. "This isn't over." Adrian looked at the phone, then at her. "What do we do?" "We wait for Reyes. We stay together, and we don't—" She stopped because her phone was buzzing. Unknown number again. She let it ring 4 times. 5. Voicemail. Immediately the phone rang again. Unknown number. She looked at it ringing on the table between them. Adrian said, "Don't." She picked it up. It wasn't the same voice. This one was quieter, more careful. And in the first 3 words she understood, before she understood anything else, that whoever this was, Whatever they wanted, the situation had just moved into a register that Agent Reyes and her legal pad and her federal building with its recycled air had not prepared her for. Because the voice said, "We have Vivian." The kitchen was very still. "She left the estate at 6 this morning," the voice said, "before your federal colleagues had an arrangement in place for her protection. She is currently with us. She is not harmed." A pause waited with the specific gravity of someone who needs you to understand the distance between not harmed and something else. What happens next depends entirely on what you decide in the next 4 hours. Isabella's hand on the phone was completely steady. Her heart was not. "What do you want?" she said. "There are 2 financial records," the voice said. "Specific documents. They are currently in the possession of your father-in-law's investigators. If those documents reach the federal case file, certain transactions become traceable to people who cannot afford to be traced." Another pause. "We want the documents. We want your assurance that the information you have provided to Agent Reyes about the sub-Caruso structures will be withdrawn. And we want this resolved before—" Isabella did not answer the voice on the phone. She set it on the table, screen up, and looked at it for 3 seconds. At the unknown number glowing there, at the call timer running, at the silence on the line that was being filled by whoever was holding the other end, waiting for her to speak, calculating the weight of her silence and what it meant. Then she pressed speaker. Adrian heard it. His face changed, not with panic, with the specific focused stillness of a man who has spent the last 12 hours reconfiguring what he understands about the world he's living in and has arrived, on the other side of that reconfiguration, at something harder than what he started with. She picked up her other phone, the older one, the backup she kept in her coat pocket out of a habit she'd developed years ago in the specific way that people who live adjacent to dangerous things develop small, redundant habits without knowing why. And she sent a single text to Reyes. 3 words and the call number copied from the screen. Then she brought the primary phone back to her ear. "I'm still here," she said. "Good," the voice said. "Then you understand. I understand that you're holding a woman who has already agreed to cooperate with federal investigators, which means your leverage is limited. I understand that the documents you want are not in my possession and are not in my control, which means I cannot give them to you even if I wanted to. And I understand that this call is being recorded." She paused. "Not by me. By the people who've been monitoring my line since 3 this morning." Silence. "Not long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. "You're bluffing," the voice said. But it had changed. Something in the timbre, something in the pace of it. The particular audible texture of a man who has just introduced doubt into a plan that didn't include doubt. "Call it," Isabella said. She waited. Adrian was looking at her across the table with an expression she didn't have time to read. The call ended. She set the phone down. Her hand was shaking, a fine, almost invisible tremor that she felt in the bones of her fingers and that did not reach the surface, or barely. She pressed her palm flat on the table. "Was that true?" Adrian asked. "About the monitoring?" "I don't know," she said. "I told Reyes about the first call. Whether they had time to set up monitoring before the second one." She looked at the phone. "It doesn't matter. The goal was to put doubt in their calculation. Doubt changes behavior. Or it accelerates it." "Yes," she said. "Or that." She was already standing, already moving toward the hallway, when her phone rang again. This time it was Reyes. "We got it," Reyes said before Isabella could speak. "The second call. We had the line flagged after your first text. We're running the number now. It's a burner, but the tower location puts it 6 miles from the estate." A pause, compressed and urgent. "You said they have Vivian Cross." "That's what the voice said, that she left the estate at 6 this morning. She was not under formal protective custody. She came in voluntarily last night and was released pending the formal cooperation agreement. There was no legal mechanism to hold her." Reyes's voice had the specific quality of someone angry at a situation rather than a person. "We're attempting to reach her now. If she left the estate voluntarily at 6, she may have gone to the Pacific Heights property without knowing it was compromised. We secured it, but there's a window between our teams rotating and—" She stopped. "Stay in the house. Do not go anywhere. We have a vehicle 2 minutes out." The call ended. Isabella stood in the hallway. She thought about Vivian. She had told Vivian in the rose garden that cooperating with investigators wouldn't make them even. That was true. She had meant it when she said it, and she meant it now. But even is not the same thing as abandoned, and whatever Vivian had done and whatever she had known and whatever she had chosen, she had also. In that room at midnight, with her hand pressed over her mouth and her face drained of color, understood something about what Leonardo had been planning, and the understanding had been genuine. Isabella had been reading faces for 15 years. She knew genuine. She went upstairs. She went to the room where the estate kept its emergency supplies, a habit of Giovanni's, something he'd installed in every Moretti property, a practical carryover from a life that required practical thinking about worst-case scenarios. She opened the cabinet. She took out a first aid kit, a flashlight, and a set of car keys that belonged to the secondary vehicle, the old Land Rover that Giovanni kept registered under the estate company name. She came back downstairs. Adrian was in the hallway. He saw the keys. "No," he said. "They have her 6 miles away. Reyes has a vehicle 2 minutes out. By the time they process, organize, and move, it's 15 minutes minimum. Vivian left at 6. It's now 6:47. She's been with them for 40 minutes. Isabella. "I'm not going to do anything," she said. "I'm going to drive to within sight of the Pacific Heights property and wait. I'm going to be closer than the federal response, and I'm going to be visible, which means whoever is holding her will know that the window they thought they had is already compromised." She looked at him. "I'm not a weapon. I'm a deterrent." "That's insane." "Yes," she said. "Come with me or don't." He took the flashlight out of her hand and went to the door. They drove. The valley was fully light now, gold and clear, the kind of morning that had nothing to do with the night that had preceded it. Isabella drove without speaking. Adrian sat in the passenger seat with his phone out, tracking the federal response through the updates Reyes was sending to Isabella's phone. He read them aloud in a flat voice. "Unit dispatched. Warrant for the property cleared by duty judge at 6:52. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes, Adrian said. "I know." She drove faster. The Pacific Heights property was a condo building on a residential street that looked like every other residential street in this part of the city. Clean, expensive, quiet, in the particular way of places where quiet is itself a commodity. Isabella had never been here. She knew the address from the files Reyes had shown her. She turned onto the street and drove slowly. She saw Vivian before she saw anything else. Vivian was on the sidewalk in front of the building, not inside, not being held in the sense Isabella had been imagining, but outside, standing in yesterday's wedding dress with a phone in her hand, and a man on either side of her who were not holding her arms, but whose positioning was the specific positioning of people who are not offering a choice. Isabella pulled the Land Rover to the curb. She stopped the engine. The man on Vivian's left looked up. He was maybe 50, compact, the kind of build that comes from functional use rather than display. He looked at the Land Rover. He looked at Isabella through the windshield. His face did the thing that faces do when they're calculating, running the information they have against the information they suddenly don't have. Isabella got out of the car. "Don't," Adrian said. She got out anyway. She walked toward the three of them at a pace that was not fast and not slow. She was aware of her heartbeat, not racing, elevated, steady in the elevated way, the way it gets when the body has committed to something and is now simply executing. She was aware of the morning air. She was aware of Vivian's face, which had found her across the distance between them and was doing something complicated. Fear and relief, and something she couldn't read that might have been shame. The man on Vivian's left said, "Mrs. Moretti, you should not be here." "I know," she said. She stopped 6 feet from them. She looked at Vivian directly. "Are you hurt?" Vivian shook her head, small, tight movement. "Good." She looked at the man. "This street has 2 federal surveillance units on it right now, both placed after the call you made 40 minutes ago. The warrant for this property was cleared by a duty judge at 6:52. She said it the same way she'd handled every piece of information in the last 12 hours. Not dramatically, just placing it in front of him the way you place evidence on a table, letting it sit there doing its own work. The response vehicle is 9 minutes out. You have enough time to leave. You do not have enough time to do anything else." The man looked at her. He was calculating. She could feel it, the weight of him thinking, the specific quality of a person measuring what they stand to lose against what they stand to gain, running the arithmetic of a situation that had stopped producing favorable numbers. He looked at his colleague. Something passed between them. No words. Then he looked at Vivian. He said, "We'll be in touch." The way you say it when you mean something entirely different, and then they walked away. Down the sidewalk, unhurried, in the manner of men who have always operated by making exits look voluntary. Isabella watched them go. She watched until they turned the corner. She did not exhale until they turned the corner. Vivian sat down on the sidewalk in her wedding dress. Not collapsed, sat deliberately, the way someone sits when their legs have made a decision their mind didn't consult. She sat on the concrete with her back against the building and her knees up, and the train of the ivory silk pooled around her and her face tilted toward the morning sky. Isabella sat down next to her. They sat on the sidewalk in the early morning of a San Francisco residential street. One of them in the dress she'd gotten married in less than 24 hours ago, both of them beyond the specific range of exhaustion where exhaustion feels like anything. "How did they find you?" Isabella said. "I called the property," Vivian said. Her voice was very flat. "This one. I didn't know it had been secured. I had belongings here. I'd been keeping things here for—" She stopped. "For months. It felt like mine. I was stupid." "You were shocked, and you weren't thinking. That's different from stupid." Vivian looked at her sideways. "Why are you here?" "Because Reyes couldn't get here in time." "That's not—" Vivian stopped. "Why did you come yourself?" Isabella looked at the empty corner where the two men had turned out of sight. "Because I've spent 15 years waiting for other people to handle things," she said. "I'm done with that." Vivian was quiet for a moment, then, "They wanted me to recant my cooperation statement. They said if I withdrew it and said I'd been coerced by the investigators to implicate people I had no real knowledge of." She stopped. "They said it would be better for everyone. Better for them." "Yes." "Did you agree to anything?" "No." She said it without hesitation. "No, I didn't." She looked at her hands, at the wedding ring she was still wearing, the detail so small and so enormous. "I don't know if that's brave or just, I don't know what it is. I was scared. I am scared." She paused. "I made choices that I can't undo. I knew enough to know I was helping something that wasn't right. And I did it anyway because I believed—" She stopped again. "I believed what he told me." "Which means either I'm a fool, or I'm a criminal, or I'm both." "That's for the court to determine," Isabella said. "Not you. Not now." "Does that help? Knowing it's not your decision?" "No," Isabella said, "but it's accurate. And accurate is what we have." The federal vehicle arrived 4 minutes later. Reyes got out of the passenger side before it had fully stopped. She looked at Isabella on the sidewalk, then at Vivian, then back at Isabella with an expression that processed several things in rapid sequence and settled on something that was not quite relief and not quite exasperation and was somewhere between the two where real responses live. "You drove here, what?" Reyes said. "Yes. On your own. With my brother-in-law." Reyes looked at the Land Rover, at Adrian in the passenger seat. She pressed her lips together briefly. Then she crouched down to Vivian's level. "Are you all right?" "No," Vivian said, "but I'm here." "That's enough for now," Reyes said. "Let's get you up." What followed was the specific organized process of a situation being made institutional. Statements taken, the street secured, 2 additional units dispatched after the men who had turned the corner, a call to the duty judge about the expanded warrant. Isabella gave her account standing beside the Land Rover with the morning sun on her face, and Adrian beside her and Reyes taking notes in the shorthand she'd been using for 6 hours the night before. When it was done, Reyes looked at her. "Go home," she said. "The estate. Stay there. Don't drive anywhere alone until we have the 2 individuals from this morning in custody." A pause. "And get an attorney today, before noon. I mean it." "I know," Isabella said. "You did well this morning," Reyes said. She said it simply, without decoration. "Don't do it again." Isabella almost smiled. She drove back to the estate with Adrian, and neither of them spoke for most of the drive, which was its own kind of communication. The specific silence of two people who have been through something together and don't need to process it out loud because the processing is happening in the silence itself. They were almost at the estate when Adrian said, "She's going to have a hard time, Vivian." Yes. She didn't know about the medication research, about what he was planning for you. I believe that. Does it change anything? Isabella looked at the road, at the vineyard coming into view on the hillside, the rows of vines in the morning light. It doesn't change what she did. It changes what I think of her. She paused. Those aren't the same thing. Adrian nodded. He looked out his window. What do you think of her? I think she's a person who made choices she can't undo for a man who wasn't what he told her he was. She paused. I know something about that. The months that followed were not clean. They were not the smooth montage of recovery that people imagine when they think about the aftermath of catastrophe. They were administrative and exhausting and full of the specific small violence of paperwork, of depositions, of attorneys in conference rooms speaking about her life in the third person while she sat and listened and corrected the record when the record needed correcting. Leonardo Moretti was formally charged on 9 federal counts, 6 weeks after the wedding night. The charges included wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, conspiracy, and, following the full forensic analysis of the notebook found at the Pacific Heights property, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, which the prosecutors attached to the medication research and the insurance policy and the one-way flight and the birthday timing and all the small pieces that had been designed to look unconnected and had been connected all along. He pled not guilty. Then 4 months later, he pled guilty. Isabella was not in the courtroom when he entered the plea. She had been advised by her attorney to be absent from proceedings where her presence might complicate the sentencing recommendation, and she had agreed to the advice because by that point she had learned, was still learning, to accept guidance from people who understood things she didn't, which was itself a change, a significant one, a departure from 15 years of having been guided by one person whose guidance had been a map of his own interests dressed as care for hers. She heard about the plea from her attorney, on the phone, on a Tuesday afternoon in October when she was standing in the new studio space she'd rented in San Francisco's Design District, a large, spare industrial room with good north light and the smell of fresh paint still in the walls, her grandmother's sketchbooks arranged on the work table beside her own, the name she'd been born with stenciled on the door in clean sans serif letters. She listened to her attorney give her the details. She thanked him. She ended the call. She stood in the studio for a long moment. Then she went back to work. The sentencing came in February, 3 weeks before the birthday that had been marked in a dead man's plans as a deadline. Leonardo Moretti received 22 years on the federal fraud and conspiracy counts and a concurrent sentence on the murder conspiracy charge that the judge addressed in her sentencing remarks, with the specific deliberate severity of someone who wants the weight of a thing on record. Isabella read the transcript that evening. She read it once, carefully, all the way through. She did not read it again. Giovanni Moretti cooperated fully with the investigation, as he had told her he would on that morning in the study with the 3 cold coffee cups and the folder open on the desk. The cooperation negotiation took 8 months. He was ultimately charged on 2 counts related to the original shell structure, reduced significantly from what the initial investigation had suggested might be possible, a reduction that reflected both the age of the original offenses and the substantive value of his cooperation. He received a 3-year suspended sentence and a substantial financial penalty. He sold the Napa estate. He told Isabella before the listing went public. He called her on a Sunday morning and told her he had decided, and she listened and she said she understood. And after the call, she sat in the studio for a long time, looking at her grandmother's sketchbooks and thinking about the stone bench by the rose garden and the morning light and what he had told her there. And she decided that what she felt about the sale was something she would carry quietly rather than resolve. Some things don't resolve. She was learning that too. Adrian filed for annulment of the marriage 4 months after the wedding night. The legal process was straightforward, grounds of fraud, which was not a difficult case to make. And it was finalized in the early spring. He came to the studio the day it was finalized and they had coffee, and he was quiet in the way he'd been quiet for months. The quietness of a man who has been remade by something and is not yet sure what he has been remade into. She's going to trial, he said. Vivian, who had ultimately been charged on 2 counts, fraud and conspiracy, the cooperation reducing the larger charges to these two, and who had declined a plea and decided to contest it, a decision her attorney had advised against and which she had made anyway with the specific stubbornness of someone who needed the process, needed the formal accounting, needed to stand in front of it and say her piece. "I know," Isabella said. "Will you go?" "No." She looked at her coffee. "I gave my deposition. That's my contribution." She paused. She needs to face it herself. I'm not going to be in the room for that. Adrian nodded. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Do you hate her?" Isabella thought about it. She gave it the real consideration the question deserved, which was her practice now, to not answer things she hadn't fully thought through, to be honest about the time that thinking takes. "No," she said finally. "I think hate requires a certain amount of energy I've reallocated." "To what?" She looked around the studio. At the drawings on the wall, her own and her grandmother's interleaved. The older woman's pencil sketches of Italian interiors and coastlines alongside Isabella's current project drawings. A commission for a family in Marin who wanted their house made to feel like somewhere they actually lived. "To this," she said. The Vivian Cross trial lasted 11 days. She was convicted on both counts and sentenced to 18 months, reduced to 14 with credit for cooperation. Isabella read the coverage the morning it was published, in the studio before the light had properly arrived, with coffee and the quiet that came before the day's work. She thought about the rose garden, the wedding dress on the sidewalk. We have Vivian. The way Vivian had looked at her across the distance of that sidewalk morning, fear and relief, and the things she hadn't been able to read that she understood now had been the specific expression of a person who has done wrong things and knows it and cannot find a clean place to set that knowledge down. She thought, I hope she finds something after. She was surprised to discover she meant it. A year after the wedding night, Isabella drove to Napa. The estate had been sold to a hospitality group that was converting it to a boutique property. The main house was in the middle of the renovation she could see from the road. Scaffolding on the east wing, construction vehicles in the drive. The vineyard was still intact, still producing, the new owners having had the sense to leave the thing that worked. She did not stop at the main estate. She parked at the road access point below the south property line, the access she knew from years of summer visits. The old wooden gate that opened onto a walking path through the lower vines. The gate was still there, still unlocked. She went through it. She walked up through the vineyard in the afternoon light. The rows of vines on either side of her heavy with late-season growth, the smell of them sharp and green and deeply familiar in the way that smells bypass thought and go directly to the older parts of the mind. She walked until she reached the stone bench at the edge of the rose garden. The garden that had not been touched by the renovation yet, that still held its shape, that still had the particular quality of neglected but surviving things. She sat down. The pond was 15 feet away, still and dark in the afternoon shadow. She could see the vineyard falling away below her, the valley beyond it, the hills going golden, the same way they had gone golden on the day of the wedding. She sat for a long time. She thought about Giovanni, who was in a care facility in San Francisco now, who had aged dramatically in the years since everything had come apart, who called her on Thursday mornings, a habit they had somehow developed, a routine that had assembled itself without either of them designing it. She thought about Adrian, who was running two of the legitimate Moretti businesses now under a restructured entity, who was doing it carefully and well, who had told her last month that he had started seeing someone and had immediately apologized for telling her as if good news required an apology in the current climate of their lives. And she had told him to stop apologizing. It was good news. Receive it. She thought about her studio. The commission in Marin, which she had finished and which the family had loved. The two commissions that had come from that, word of mouth, the specific velocity of good work finding more work. The name on the door that was her grandmother's name and her own name and nobody else's. She thought about Leonardo. She thought about him in the specific, contained way she had learned to think about things that could not be changed and could not be filed and could not be resolved into something clean. He was in a federal facility in Central California. He would be there for a long time. She did not think about the man he might have been, somewhere before the decisions that had made him what he was. She had tried that, in the early months, the specific grief of trying to find the person you thought you knew inside the person you found out about, and it had cost her more than it gave her, and she had decided to stop. What she thought about sitting on the bench was the quality of her own 15 years. Not ruined, not wasted, not a lie in every particular. She had learned things in that marriage. She had built skills in relationships and a particular kind of attention. The attention of someone who has learned to read rooms and hold information and stay steady when things are moving fast. She had learned herself in the specific way that adverse conditions teach you what you're made of, which is not the way you choose to learn it, but is genuine learning nonetheless. The afternoon was going. The light was changing on the hills, the gold deepening toward amber, the shadows of the vine rows stretching long across the ground. She reached into her coat pocket. The ring was there. It had been there since the night she'd taken it off in interview room 4 and put it in her pocket and not put it back on. She'd carried it for a year, not as a symbol of anything, not because she couldn't let go of it. She'd carried it because she hadn't decided yet what to do with it, and she had learned not to make decisions before they were ready to be made. She held it in her palm, small and gold and warm from her body, a thing that had been part of her for 15 years and was not part of her anymore, was not a marker of anything that still existed, not love, not vow, not the particular architecture of two lives built together. It had been all of those things, and it was none of them now, and what it was now was just a ring, just metal, just the shape of a circle, which means nothing more than what you decide it means. She stood up. She walked to the edge of the pond. The water was dark and still and reflected the sky, the deep late afternoon blue of it, the one early star that had appeared at the eastern edge. She looked at the sky and the water for a moment, at the version of it that existed only in reflection, that was real and not real at once. She opened her hand. The ring caught the last of the light as it fell. A brief metallic arc, a single small flash, and then it was in the water, and then it was gone, and the surface of the pond closed over it the way water closes over everything, completely, without a mark. She stood there for a moment. The vineyard was quiet around her. The valley below was beginning to show lights as the afternoon gave out. Somewhere on the lower road a car moved through, headlights coming on, going somewhere specific with no knowledge of this hill and this pond, and this woman standing at its edge, watching the water settle. She breathed, in and out. The air smelled like the end of a season, the specific smell of things that have grown as far as they're going to grow this year, and are beginning the process of returning to themselves, of pulling back what was extended, of resting before the next growing. She turned and walked back through the vineyard, through the rows, along the path, down toward the gate where the car was parked, and the valley was waiting and the road went south toward San Francisco, toward the studio with her name on the door, and the drawings on the wall and the work that was hers, entirely, only hers, not a life inside someone else's structure, but a structure of her own. She went through the gate. She got in the car. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel and the engine off and the last of the vineyard light coming through the windshield. Then she started the car. She drove. The ring was in the pond. The pond was on a hill. The hill was part of a valley that was part of a state that was part of a country that had laws and courts and the long, imperfect machinery of consequence. A machinery that had taken a year and cost everyone in its path something significant, and had produced, at its end, not justice exactly, because justice is a word that doesn't fully cover what actually happens, but accountability, which is different, which is smaller and more real and more durable than justice. Leonardo Moretti would be 64 years old when he was released, if the sentence held, if the appeals went nowhere, if the law remained what it was. She did not spend energy on that calculation. It was not her calculation to make. What was hers was the road ahead, the lights of San Francisco appearing as she came over the rise, the city spread out below the bridge, and the water going dark around it, and the whole enormous specific fact of a life that was, at this moment, entirely her own. She had survived a wedding that was a crime. She had survived a marriage that was a deception. She had survived the discovery that the danger she was in was not the kind she had been looking at. She was still here, not because someone had saved her, because she had walked into a room and opened an envelope and sat in a federal building for 6 hours, and driven 6 miles toward something most people would have driven away from, and written 8 pages with a cramping hand in the middle of the night, and done all of it without waiting for permission or rescue or the version of strength that comes from having no fear. She had been afraid the whole time. She had done it anyway. The bridge lights were on. She drove toward them, and the water was below, and the city was ahead, and behind her in the dark on a hill in Napa Valley, a small gold ring rested at the bottom of a still pond, and the water above it held the reflection of the first real stars of the evening, and the vineyard breathed in the night air, and the vines that had been trained for decades along lines someone else had laid down grew quietly in their rows, alive and unharvested and, for now, at rest. That was all. That was enough.